What's up, YouTube, and welcome back to my channel. It has been an incredibly busy week, but I really wanted to have this conversation. So I get this question a lot, more and more, especially since I've kind of stepped out of the closet. As an atheist, the question that I'm getting a lot, and of course, it's a lot of questions, right? But one of the more common questions is, why are Black people leaving the church? Why are so many leaving the church now? I mean, many people, think it's something that would have never happened. It's something like, oh no, this is just odd. But I do like to bring some nuance on these things. As number one, I often like to remind people that many of the movements in the Black community have been organized by atheists and freethinkers. The March on Washington was organized by A. Philip Randolph. And then what we know as the Harlem Renaissance, which was then known as the New Negro Movement, was organized by Hubert Henry Harrison, the Black Socrates, as he was styled during that time, who is literally, in many ways, the reason that we have a Carter G. Woodson and a Marcus Garvey. All right, so before I jump into this conversation today, you already kind of know the routine. If you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Yeah, all that stuff. Oh, consider joining our community. You can do so on Patreon, or you can do so through our YouTube membership program, or just join us during our Sunday sessions, and you can get access to the Discord. So there's all types of ways to get involved, right? And then just also consider volunteering. As you know, we're really committed over here to building secular community everywhere that we can. And if you'd like to be a part of that, let us know. We love to have you on the team. Um, and I think that's about it. Oh yeah, we have merch. It's really dope merch. Okay, let me jump into this because I can tell now that I'm kind of itching about this. So yes, there is an increasing trend of Black people separating themselves from the church, and this trend for some people is alarming, or at the very least surprising, because of the perceived historical role of Black churches in African American communities, and specifically roles that have or perceptions that have emphasized the significance of Black churches in the social and political life of Black folk. And I like to remind people that this role is often overstated and underdemonstrated. But that is typically due to the hearers being either unaccustomed to asking for evidence or uncomfortable with the idea of asking for evidence. But when you do actually review the Black church's role in the social and political life of Black people, it has not been great. And I can of course take you down the rabbit trail of all the ways that it's been bad, and slaughter some sacred cows. By the way, we do have a sacred cow shirt too. It's dope. But slaughter some sacred cows by pointing to the historicity of the way things actually happen, as opposed to the propaganda of the way things happen. But I think instead of doing that, we can jump straight to the conclusion and just take a look at the communities where these Black churches are, even the historical ones, even the ones that we think, no, this church really means something. And then you begin to realize that no, this church actually didn't really mean something. It was just this person who did something just so happened to work at this church for a brief period of time. But when you actually study this particular church's history, you find out that they were very much anti social justice, and that's actually why they had got rid of the pastor before this other person. See, I'm trying not to be disrespectful, because that's, or not even not be disrespectful. I don't want to go off on a tangent here. That's really the goal. But yeah, so there's a lot of history there that is just not as accurate as we like to portray it. As more propaganda than history. And the truth of the matter is, if enough trusted people say something is true, it must be true, because after all, everybody can't be lying. But the thing is, everybody can be misinformed, particularly when everyone has separated themselves from actual ways of knowing. And in a lot of these cases, especially when it comes to the Black church, you don't know by evidence because you can't question the evidence. I think most people who grew up in Black church will know what I'm talking about. or just grew up in a black household, period, you don't get to question this. You can't question God. You can't question the preacher. You don't, Lord forbid, if you touch God's anointed, so you have all of these things that you can't do. So it's almost impossible to actually have a way of knowing if you believe that this institution is valid and that the way this institution approaches life is valid. And so, and so the big point here is that really much of our flowery machinations about the black church are steeped in unverified misinformation, which I think is part of what leads to some of the trends now, is that people have been in it long enough to look around and say, "Hey, this isn't exactly what I thought it was." And then sometimes people even wrestle with the economics of that and realize, like, man, this probably some of the things that I thought it was, it couldn't have even possibly been. Just so anyway, the as times have changed, there have been evolving perspectives, and this has led to shifts in the way that people approach church. As technology has become more prominent, it's become harder and harder for people to hold on to familiar misinformation, right? Because now it's really hard to, or it's really easy. And I know this is going to sound counterintuitive, but hopefully you catch what I'm saying here. It's actually easy for you to challenge your familiar misinformation, the information that you have wrong, that you've kind of lived by your whole life. The more you begin to expand your bubble, and search on Google and stuff like that, is actually going to be quite easy to find um, reasons to question or engage that information. Unfortunately, though, letting go of familiar misinformation does nothing to deter one from grasping onto brand new misinformation. If you haven't wrestled with the part of you that receives information without diligent verification. And so, yeah, as the times begin to change, there are more of us who are able to challenge our familiar information, so familiar misinformation. So if you grew up, Jehovah's Witness or Mormon or Baptist or Pentecostal or charismatic or what may have you, it is easier for you, when if you do get to that point of thinking like, what am I engaging in? It's easier for you to realize that, this might not be good information, because you're more correlated with the people who are giving you information. And you can be like, yeah, I trusted Big Mama and all, but now that I think about it, I do know there are certain things that Big Mama claimed to know that she couldn't have possibly no, and so it's easier to challenge that. But the problem comes in that, and that's why I kind of wanted to have this conversation with a little bit of nuance, is that just because people are leaving the black church does not mean that they're leaving superstition. Doesn't even mean that they're leaving religion, because a lot of times what's happening so far, and at least by the vast majority, is that they're just letting go of their familiar misinformation. But they're not a great many yet. There are some, obviously there are a growing number of us out here. And I think that's going to help the other numbers, but you still have a large amount of people who left the church who have still not wrestled with that part of them that believe misinformation. I remember that was like an important conversation I had with myself, because of course you have some people who go and especially in my community, they misled me, they lied to me, they hid from me. And like, I live in a place of like extreme responsibility. We can argue about whether that's bad or not. But so I kind of skipped a lot of that from they lied to like, ooh, why did I trust? Why did I receive this information so easily? Why didn't I verify? And it's just a way of self-checking me to say, hey, the impetus on me when it comes to my life is, I can't expect anybody else to cross the T's and dot their I's when it comes to my life, but I should likely do that, especially as long as I live in a world like this. And so I wrestled with the part of me that had been willing to receive information without diligent verification, which helped me a lot. And I think that's something that we do have to be mindful of, is that everybody who's leaving the church is not becoming an atheist, and everybody who's becoming an atheist is not becoming a critical thinker. You'd be surprised out of some things out of this. And I do want to take that extra step of saying, I'm not necessarily suggesting that any of us should be the critical thinking police and be, policing other people on how to think. But I am an advocate of, making sure that as much good information is out here as possible, that people do have the ability to wrestle with that information. And so I want to talk a little bit more, jump into this a little bit more of how cultural shifts have also played a role in people leaving the church. So one of those is just modernization. Modernization, exposure to diverse viewpoints have definitely influenced people to reconsider um, traditional religious practices. Like Oprah is likely one of the biggest reasons why Black people are leaving churches and have been for the past 20 years. While she's obviously not an atheist, she definitely used her platform to somewhat normalize exploring varying paths. And you'd be surprised how many people, were elated by that, and it gave them quite a bit of freedom to explore outside of the church. Many churches were absolutely pissed about this because many members were highly impacted by this normalization, and that's literally what a lot of preachers say. She's normalizing people viewing Jesus is not the only way, and that's literally um, what happened there. I want to make sure because there's also this idea of the urban church as the urban church becomes more modern. So you move away from choirs to having more like concert style teams, modern concerts, because choirs used to be the big concerts in the secular world, and then you started getting groups, and then churches later on says, "Oh, we'll just do groups on Sundays," which is in essence the praise team. Um, Church, as things became more and more modern, it became easier and easier to recognize that church isn't very much different from any of the other places that we visit or socialize at. And so for a lot of people, especially those, I don't want to say well-to-do, but because it's not necessarily economic, but those who just have more to do and have more networks of people to socialize with, church just the more modern it became, the more less of a need it became for some people. Not for all, because for many, for others, the more modern it became, the more of a stick it becomes for them of being there. But there's a catch 22 even with that, because then they're not there for necessarily the same reasons that Big Mama and Uncle Jojo and them was there. People now attend church, even though it's still ultimately sociological reasons. The sociological bait is definitely, a lot better now. There's better chum in the water these days. But another thing, as far as cultural shifts, and I think this one gets mentioned, but I don't know if it gets highlighted, gets the attention that it deserves, and that's educational influence, right? Um, the role of education and access to information and encouraging critical thinking and skepticism about religious teachings has likely been paramount. But to give some color to that, I like to remind people that public education has only been widespread in this country since 1910 and wasn't required by every state until 1930. So for the majority of human history, and I think people forget this, but for the majority of human history, institutional education has belonged to a very small population, has belonged to the minority, which is likely what slowed down our progress at some points, and is likely what is seemingly accelerating our progress over the past 100 years. Because if anything, when people ask these types of questions, that's kind of the backdrop that we're looking at. And so I want you to think about how many, especially just looking at this country, whether you're looking at the 1614, 1613 date, or you're looking at 1776, whichever way you slice this pie, I want you to think about how many generations of people are then able to be inculcated and indoctrinated um, without the challenge of an education. So after nearly 100 years of now, well, yeah, let's think about that. Yeah, think about how many generations of people are indoctrinated without the challenge of an education. And so, without that, and again, knowing that, I'm not trying to say some great disservice was done. Again, public education wasn't even a thing in this country until 1910. And if it is a great disservice, it's a great disservice that's been a great disservice ever since education has been a thing. And education has been a thing for a very long time. I think just off the top of my head, I want to say at least 4,800 years ago, education was a thing amongst elites. But as you can see, it's taken us a very long time to start thinking that, hey, this should be available to everybody. And I mean, even when it was available to the elite, it wasn't always available to women, and so now that education is more available, you do have people who are able to think about things differently, because education, when it's done right, really isn't what to think. It is how to think. But when you think about, how many years, especially just using this country alone, since 1776, between 1776 and 1910, of there being no form of public education, then yes, Ma and Pa are the law. They understand the world better than I do. Everything they say is true, because likely Ma and Pa were not educated as well. Now, we obviously know there were exceptions. We're talking about the vast majority here, and that's what we should be dealing with here. But so, and that's what that kind of answers the question of, like, oh, well, why are they so stuck? Why are Black people so committed to this? Because when we were being inculcated with this ideology, Ma and Pa were the law. Ma and Pa knew best, and Ma and Pa wouldn't lie. But now, after 100 years of institutionalized education being a societal norm, personal education becomes somewhat of a habit beyond the boundaries of the institutions themselves. And so people begin to seek out new sources and new teachers, and often find them in places like artists, authors, or even other rogue academics. And so now, when you do the math, it probably shouldn't have taken 100 years to get here. But when you examine the institution of public education in this country, you will find it still laced with superstition, misinformation, and a host of educators who are dedicated to protecting their students from free thinking and the evils of evolution. So I'm not saying our public education system necessarily made us smart, but it definitely gave us the tools to be more curious about the world around us. And in a lot of ways, that is smart. I think the thing is, likely everybody is smart. We can all stand to be smarter. But an interesting correlation is that shortly after public education became mandatory in the United States, multi-generational families living under one roof began to drastically decrease, as school graduates wanted to go out and experience the world, even if it was only two neighborhoods away from Big Mama's house. And this move served as a stabilizing factor for many communities, and in many ways, enabling families to grow economically, to expand their territory, and all that good stuff. But for communities that did not have an economic floor, this definitely devastated their chances of catching up as a community, because family property tended to become abandoned after the matriarch died, because everybody had other bills to pay for in other houses, because they were no longer multi-generational living. Again, not pointing a finger there, but just highlighting some things that are often not considered, I guess. So again, I'm not saying public education made us the smartest bunch in the litter, nor should that have even necessarily have been our expectation, because smart is always going to be subjective, and it's something that as of now exists on an ever increasing spectrum. But public education has helped us gain some comfort in spreading out, good or bad, and therefore making it easier to separate from once strongly held familial beliefs. So once people start moving from out of mom and pa's roof, then mom and pa are no longer the law, and so that's something I know my community still wrestles with to this day, and I'm sure other communities do too. Any community that went from that multi-generational way of living to this more separated way of living, you start getting, oh, these kids aren't what they used to be. And I often remind people, anybody who's complaining about today's kids, any generation that's complaining about the next generation ought to remember who raised it. And so, but yeah, so all of these things kind of lead to making it easier for people to kind of separate. um but then there's also, so those kind of cultural shifts, there's also personal and social factors. So there's disillusionment with religious institutions, and this can be connected to hypocrisy, scandals, or failure to adjust social issues. And actually, out of all of those, I think the social issues I think the social issues aspect is probably the biggest one. The Black church's response to the social and economic needs of the Black community is absolutely shameful, offensive, and pathetic. With as many churches as we have, and as long as we've been at it, not one of us have been able to work together to make all that mega mean something tangible in the communities that we serve. Churches have the ability to power and drive real community solutions, but because they are governed by their superstitions, they are literally a den of thieves. And you have some, and this is why I do advocate, um, be very careful about making broad generalizations of mega pastors themselves, because there are some who have tried. I know Jamal Bryant, who has been scandalous. And he's been honest about his scandal, so it is what it is. But I know he and actually the predecessor of the church that he's at now, who also had some scandals attached to him, they were actually trying to do things that would have been really prevalent and powerful. Jamal is still trying to do some things. He's one of the only Black pastors that I know that is actually speaking up about the cannabis discrepancies and marginalization of Black communities in relation to that, and is actually trying to get his church involved in activism in that. And I think if more Black churches did that, I would have less shameful things to say. But unfortunately, that's typically not the route that the Black church has taken. There's not many places in history where, when Black people have gotten fair treatment, it was the Black church on the front line. And when I say the front line, I mean the one leading the movement. The Black church often has to be corralled into helping, literally, because of the resources that they're draining. And so the other parties have to get the Black church involved and say, hey, you're the ones with the buildings, you're the ones with the money, and you almost have to beg them or grease their palms or give them some type of honorable mention or key to the city, to get them to even do anything. But even beyond that, because of their superstitious beliefs, they are very sheepish when it comes to actually getting involved in things, because the Lord is their shepherd, and they shall not want. So yeah, it's been bad. It's been bad. As a matter of fact, the Black church there's so much the Black church could be doing, and likely should be doing. But once you realize where you are, it's different. Let's just be honest. It's very different to be white and believe this, and to be Black and to believe this. And so I think it does take like an extra layer of locking this shit in to really get, Black folks stuck in this. And so once you really kind of realize that, you realize that no pastor, as long as they believe this, is going to be able to lead the Black church into being anything other than superficial. Um, that's all superstition can do, which is why much of what, and I don't want to go too far here, but this is why much of a lot of stuff that has been done politically for the Black community, that the Black church has been attached to or proud of, has been tokenism at best. And so, of course, also delusionment with scandals and stuff like that. Scandals, hypocrisy, it doesn't help. But I'm going to be honest with you, that doesn't actually hurt as much as people think, because typically when people are disillusioned by one of their pastors who does something scandalous, they're either going to go to a different church or they'll stick it out, sometimes in a very human way. of understanding that, hey, this person is a human and these things happen. And then sometimes in a very superstitious or superficial way, as in, no, this is God's man, this is God's woman, this is the man of God, and you don't judge the man of God, you don't judge the woman of God. You'd be surprised of the things that I've seen people stay through. I know a husband who watched his wife get slapped in the face by a bishop with keys in his hands, and he purposely had the keys in his hands to slap her in the face. I'm not saying this happens at all churches, but this has happened. And the man watched his wife get slapped, and they were at church the next Sunday. So you'd be surprised. But I think one of the biggest personal shifts that helped here is individualism. Individualism, exploring these growing trends towards individualism and personal spiritual journeys outside of organized religion. There has been like a wellspring of that, again, probably for the past, well, I want to say for the past 20 years, but I actually know it's longer than that. The gospel in urban churches has become increasingly more personalized for the past 100 years, resulting in increased individualism, which has led to more resisting violations of personal autonomy. So again, I like to remind people that Tone did a song in the 90s called "Personal Jesus." I'm not going to sing it, but like, "You Are My Personal Jesus." Donnie McClurkin had a song "Just for Me." Jesus came and did it just for me. Mary Mary's in the 2000s. "It's the God in Me." This more personalized, individualized gospel gave people a little more comfort in being able to interpret their religion and their religious experience through their own understanding. Um, yeah, and so then it becomes people are less likely to be uniformly compliant with church assaults on personal autonomy, whether it's something as simple as someone saying, "Oh, well, you can't wear your hat in this building," and these people say, "Okay, fine, I won't come in this building anymore." Those are things that literally happen, especially if you're a person who you have a personal relationship with Jesus, and your version of Jesus isn't offended by people with hats on you know and so because of this, there's a growing trend of people leaving the church who are not necessarily leaving Christianity. And again, this isn't a new trend. This predates even me and my 38 years here on this planet. Because even when I was a child, there were people who didn't go to church, and when you're like, "Hey, why you didn't go to church?" And like, "Oh, God knows my heart," which let you know that these people were disillusioned, or felt no need to go to the building, but still felt that they were very much Christian, and literally they would say stuff like, "Well, you don't have to go to church to be a Christian," and also not everybody who goes to church is a Christian, and so you get all of these type of things because of these dichotomies where people are giving themselves rightfully permission to interpret their religious experiences through their own understanding and their own experiences, as instead of subjecting them to what family may have said or to what the preachers may have said. And lastly, I didn't realize I had this much to say about this, but epistemological concerns also plays a role into this, because people start questioning their beliefs and the nature of belief and knowledge, and so sometimes it's just people wanting to know God in truth, and beginning to realize, like yourself, most everyone has not actually taken that journey. um, and so this interestingly results in distrusting the church as an institution while still clinging to Christian or otherwise theist beliefs. You watch this often. Bart Ehrman kind of went through this same type of process. People don't immediately become atheists once they realize that, oh, certain things I've believed about the Bible are not true. Certain things I've believed about the history of Christianity are not true. Instead, they just stop trusting the institution and still believe that the message that the institution passed on is still likely somehow how true. There's definitely a cart before the horse problem there, but at that moment you're still on the way out, so you don't see it yet. You can't see the forest for the trees. But then sometimes there's a crack in the dissonance that manifests in a moment of admittance. And so I remember for a former friend of mine, we were sitting down and talking, and we were just looking up at the sky, and he said, "Man, I don't believe nobody up there. You know, no, it was just literally that for him. There was a crack in his dissonance, and it manifested in this moment of admitting to himself that I don't really think there's a God up there. But a lot of times that happens with people in correlations with their prayers. You know, most people can go their whole lives never exploring the dissonance to their prayers not being answered. But sometimes, you know, and I'm not even an expert of what causes it to happen. But sometimes, and for some people, there is a crack in the dissonance when they're like, you know what? Nobody answered that prayer. I did this for myself. When my wife kind of shares her story, she kind of talks about a crack having experiencing moments like that, and again, and what this kind of leads to, it leads to a distrust, oftentimes in church as an institution, not necessarily leaving religion, and ultimately that's what this video is about why are Black people leaving church, and I'm trying to do two things at once. I am highlighting, you know, some many of the reasons why Black people are leaving church, but at the same time, I'm also highlighting this other thing, which also should be very concerning, is that they're not always we're not always leaving church and getting involved into critical or rational thinking. And I'll kind of jump into that some more, but I'm going to try to wrap up here because man, this is over half an hour. Um, Sometimes there's a disagreement with an established doctrinal belief that when confronted, you know, internally is just too much to swallow. And that often leads to a clean break between the church and the individuals. And so you will often you'll find these type of situations where it's typically like person the church you, the person realized, oh man, the church folk really don't like LGBTQ people. And you know, you realize that while there's a minority of churches who are supportive, it's just not enough to be to want to associate with church anymore. That's a wrestle that some people go through where they begin to realize like, ooh, the way these people treat these other people. This also happened during the abolitionist movement, where many people left the church because of the church's treatment of and beliefs about Black people. When you read Frederick Douglass's autobiography, that's what you're going to find. You know, this is why Frederick Douglass was not a believer, because he left the church and this idea of church because of what church people believed. And so sometimes there's an established doctrinal belief that most people are able to just kind of float past their whole lives, but then maybe you get a friend who's gay, you know, and his friend is not only gay, but this friend also you know, sincerely loves the Lord just as much as you do, and then that creates an internal conflict for you. And so that happens for a lot of people and for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's not one of those doctrinal beliefs is tithing. There's just a disagreement with that belief, and that leads to a clean break. A lot of Black folk who left the church have left the church over tithing. Which there are some more connotations to that, and I'll address that in another video. And then of course, sometimes there's the desire for empirical evidence, you know, and that normally comes one or two ways. One which has already kind of been mentioned, and that's wanting to convince yourself, wanting to know God in the truth. You know, most of us who believe this, I think, and you know, I'm being a little sloppy saying that, but I think that most of us who were a part of this believed that this was true, and hope that one day we'd have good reason to believe that it was true. And some of us actually take that journey to say, okay, now I'm ready to actually get the evidence, you know, to fully understand that this is true. And then for others, it's they want to get the evidence to convince other people. So some people, no, I 100% believe that this is true. I'm going to get the evidence to debunk the atheist. You'd be surprised how many people became atheists on their way to debunk the atheist, or at the very least, left church. And so, um, I think I've given a lot of reasons, and I'm pretty sure because, again, I'm not the prototype of Black folk, I'm not the prototype of former Christians, nor am I the prototype of modern atheists. So there are going to be other people who are going to have uh, different ideas to contribute to this conversation, and I would love to see them. To kind of wrap this up, because I mentioned that yes, this trend of black people leaving the church is steadily increasing. It's been going on for a long time in small trickles, but these trickles are growing into streams and maybe even rivers soon. And so where are black folk going when they leave the church? Yes, a minority, a growing minority of black folk are becoming atheists. A growing minority. It's still uncomfortable. It's still uncomfortable for black folk. That's so much so that many black folk who are strong atheists will still refuse to go by that particular moniker because of the stigma that it has in the community. So it's a growing minority, but it's still a minority. But there are quite a few that are coming this way, that are becoming atheists, that are becoming secular humanists, or agnostics, even, because I mean we're all in the same umbrella at the end of the day. And I think what's going to help that is that we need to get, and that's what my wife and I commit ourselves to doing on Sundays, is we need to get really invested in building more secular communities everywhere that we exist. And they need to be autonomous and need to look like whatever those communities look like, and so forth, so that that is more of a normalized and socialized option. But it's not just that. People are often also people when they leave the church, they're going to other religions and spiritual practices. It has been a running joke ever since What's Love Have to Do with It that black people often leave the church and become Buddhist. This has been a running joke in the black community. Ramneo Hey Gang Kill. I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but it's been a running joke. So much so that movie came out what 20 years ago, maybe a little longer than that. Um, oh, definitely longer than that. I'm showing my age. Wow, I just felt old. And then Tyler Perry's play came out probably 10, 20 years ago. Where that was one of the things that one of those archetypes that he made fun of in his play, is that black people become Muslims in prison, and black women become Buddhist after they've been abused. Which these are obviously stereotypes, but they're most stereotypes are based in some essence of truth. And so, yes, black people leave the church. They do have been experimenting with Eastern religions, such as Buddhism. Nation of Islam is obviously a big one that black people go to. But then when they leave the Nation of Islam, they sometimes go to different Islamic sects. And just kind of talking through this. Um, I wonder how much different this would be for any other group of people. But Hebrew Israelites is another one that black folk leave the church for. Moors, Nuwapians, five percenters, which they're all kind of the same. They'll be mad at me saying that, but it's all based off the same type of superstition. The five percenters might be a little different, but yeah. And I'm gonna get some flack for that. I already know. But another one is various African indigenous spiritual systems, and I want to use spiritual with quotations there, because really trying to define the difference between spiritual and natural in indigenous systems is quite complicated, especially when it comes to African indigenous systems, as those are not two things that they saw as distinct, and so the whole idea of spiritualism, in for the most part, is incongruent with African systems. Not to say that those systems did not have their own superstitions, for sure, but this idea of spiritualism is a little different in a lot of those cultures. And so, even when some of our black folk leave the church and go to these systems, they tend to superimpose their ideas of what spirit means on these systems. And when they do that, when they try to do Native American indigenous systems as well. But also there's just black consciousness or Christ consciousness, which, I was a part of the black consciousness thing for a while, not very long, not because I don't consider myself conscious or I don't consider myself black, but because I just didn't like a lot that was happening in that community. There was definitely a lot of patriarchy, a lot of um, what do you call it? Just hate, trans hate, homo hate, all the different types of hate. I'm sure I said that wrong, but But yeah, it was just pretty bad, and then it was a lot of superstition, a lot of pseudoscience. So I also call that Sabiism, because there's a lot of people who are really into Dr. Sabi or Dr. Sebi, however you pronounce his name. So it's like, oh yes, um, and just random prophet guru followers. That one, I'm just like, every time I turn around, there's a new prophet or guru that people are following who has showed them how to get access to the sixth dimension. I'm like, bruh, you don't even know how to live in the three dimensions you're living in now. Like, what are you talking about? And so, I mean, whether it's, oh, I'm gonna get some flack for this. I mean, whether it's, your, I don't know. I don't even know the people's names, so I'm not even going to say it because I don't even want to send people there. But these are people who are teaching about secret, hidden spiritual principles about the Anunnaki and how you can make money on Wall Street while slipping any pseudoscience that tickles their fancy, and it's and that's really the alarming part. So yes, there is, just like with all the other cultures, that there is a rise of, in the black community, of people no longer affiliating themselves with church, which some people are calling non-believers. But I think that's because none of the statistics right now, or none of the surveys now, are measuring epistemology. None of them are measuring people's association with religious superstition, just religious affiliation. And so I think what's important here is to understand epistemology as the study of knowledge and justified belief. It's the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. Epistemology is crucial for discerning what can be known and how to know it. And so just because people are coming into a place of recognizing that something may not be true doesn't mean that they've been equipped themselves with how to know. And I think we need more conversations around that idea. If we can spend as much time giving people the tools to think as we do telling them what's wrong with bad beliefs, we may be able to accelerate this trend, and even more. We may be able to accelerate this trend even more while cutting out some of the harmful woo in the middle. And trust me, there is a lot of harmful woo in the middle. And so yes, while yeah, I'm absolutely excited that black folk are leaving the church, and I can't even say absolutely excited about that, because that's just a waste of an institution to me. I'd much rather if black folk were cleansing the church of superstition and then reclaiming those buildings, and reclaiming that space for community initiatives. I don't think they have to leave the church. I think they can redefine what church is, which is a part of what the work that I'm committed to doing is. At least I think it is. But at the end of the day, while yeah, it does seem like a good trend that people are leaving, it definitely is a good trend that there are people who are becoming atheist, agnostics, free thinkers, and all of those things, or just becoming more skeptical in the way they approach the world all the way around. I think we can do some work to accelerate those trends to cause some of those people from repeating some of those dangerous cycles, because I don't it any of you who were hurt by one religion, we dealing with religious trauma is something serious. Imagine dealing with the religious trauma of Christianity and then choosing another religion, and then dealing with the religious trauma of leaving that religion and then choosing another belief system, and then eventually dealing with the religious trauma of leaving that belief system. I think we can help people accelerate that process, just by shedding light on things like this. So I know I have went a long time, but I hope I've shared something of value in this conversation. Thank you for hanging out with me, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, consider joining our community, consider volunteering in our community, check out our merch, especially those Sacred Grill t-shirts. And until next time, man, keep rising, stay progressive, and stay beautiful, if you can. I'll holler at you later.